Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our presentation, Managing Employee Performance, or How to Boss Your Friends Around. This is Jamie Machik, coming from the Nicolet Federated Library System in Green Bay. Still a little rainy here. I'm sure that's probably the case for a lot of you throughout the state as well. And we have Rebecca Lemons with us today, and she's from the Huntington City Township Public Library in Huntington, Indiana, and that she is a director there. She's worked for the Marathon County Library in Wausau, and she has a master's degree in library science from UW-Milwaukee and a bachelor's degree in business management and human resources management from Upper Iowa University. And this is our final webinar for the season before we start back up again in summer and in fall. So you won't hear from me for a while on future things, but there should be some announcements, hopefully in June, about what we have coming up. And as I mentioned, Becca has some documents that I will be sharing with you through the GoToWebinar interface, and I'll be sharing those once we get started. So Becca, whenever you're ready.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jamie, for the introduction. I have myself here in PowerPoint mode, just so everybody can see what I look like. Imagine me with blonde hair because it's not red anymore. As Jamie said, I am the director of the Huntington City Township Public Library. I'm also the president of the Huntington County Literacy Coalition, and I work with the Indiana Library Federation Management Division. So I always like to tell people who I am and what I do so that they don't think I'm just some crazy person trying to tell them what to do. So I do have a bachelor's degree in business management and a bachelor's degree in human resources. So I tell people that I am a management geek, and that's just who I am. So there is me. We're going to go ahead and get started on our presentation here. So what we're going to talk about today is managing employee behavior in small libraries, or as our title is, How to Boss Your Friends Around. I originally presented this presentation at the Association of Rural and Small Libraries down in Arkansas and had really good response from it. So I'm happy to be able to do it for you guys. I would assume that most of you are from small libraries, but if you are not, this translates really well into any side of the library, so everybody can use it. As we go through here, what we're going to do is I'm going to pause every once in a while for questions. So if you have any questions as we're going, please put it in the chat. Jamie will alert me that there's a question, and we'll stop and answer any questions that you have. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have some more time to ask some questions and discuss some of the things that we've talked about. So, okay, so first things first, what does it mean when we talk about managing employee behavior? What we think about is managing behavior to achieve our workplace goals, okay? If we don't have employees behaving the way that we need them to, we can't do the things that we need to do to make our libraries operate, obviously. So what we need to think about, the first step in this has absolutely nothing to do with people, but it has to do with us knowing what we want from our people. And so what we need to know is, what does an ideal workplace look like? Now I put some terms here on the screen. These are just 4 of my things that come out: productivity, service, quality, positive attitude. Obviously, there are any number of things that we could think of that make up an ideal workplace for us. And when we have an idea of what a good workplace looks like, it makes it easier for us to create expectations for our employees. Now, why is this important? It's important because we cannot manage behavior without having expectations. Okay, and that's one thing that I stress all the time. Every time I talk to people, you can't tell someone that they're doing something wrong or right unless you've told them what you expect them to do. Okay, I can't tell you that I need you to show up to work on time and you're doing it wrong by not, if I've never, laid it out that I expect you to be to work on time. So it's a very important piece of the whole puzzle. Then the next thing we need to think about, and this is kind of unique to this conversation about small libraries and why we call this how to boss your friends around, because it is different in a small library. It's harder to do. It's harder to manage people and create expectations for them and create a structure for them. And why that is that we have obviously closer relationships with our people. If we're working in a library that has maybe 3 employees, we know those people. We have really close relationships with them. We know their families. We know their kids. We know about their pets. So it's hard to have some of these behavior conversations with people. Obviously, that leads to us having more sympathy for our coworkers because we care about them. We live in a small town with them, and we want them to be happy. We feel a lot of pressure to be liked, especially in a small organization. Now, I've worked in a place where I had 60 people working there, and I had 23 people working under me. I don't care if every one of them likes me because maybe somebody likes me, but if I work with 4 people and 3 of them don't like me, then, I'm going to have a lot of stress in my life, and it's not going to be fun. So, again, it's difficult for us to have difficult conversations with people when we don't want them to be upset with us. Obviously, in a small library, interpersonal stress is going to be huge. If we stuck 2 people in a car together for 8 hours and expected them to just get along, maybe that's how big your library is. I've worked in libraries that small. And so obviously we're going to have that stress of, we're on top of each other all the time and trying to get things done. And so it makes it really difficult. Another problem, there's not a lot of command structure sometimes in a small library. And what happens is a library director who works with 2 staff people is having to work at the front desk, you're having to do website stuff, you're having to do ordering, you're having to do this. And so they don't necessarily always see you as the person in charge. That can happen too in small departments. Maybe you are a manager of a department that has just a few people and you have to go and, maybe some days you have to go out and put labels on books. Well, that erodes that, authority command structure as far as how people see you. That leads to being less respect for authority. Not that they don't have respect for you necessarily, but they don't necessarily see you as an authority figure, and that can create a lot of difficulties. In small libraries, we have previous conceptions about people, especially in a small town. Okay, we may have known these people since they were in diapers, and now we've hired them and expect them to do work, and we're going to say, oh, well, I know that Joe, got arrested for drinking when he was 18, and I can't hire him because of that. Or, I know that your second cousin, got a DUI or something. So it can kind of color the way that we think about people, and we have to take that out of the equation when we're talking about managing behavior. Another thing for small libraries is it's generally harder to communicate. And part of that is that we may not always see our employees every day. There may be times when somebody comes in at 3 o'clock and I have to hand off the baton and say, you know what, I've got to go. I've put in my time and I can't go overtime. So here, good luck. You get to work the next 5 hours by yourself. And sometimes there's people we don't see. Maybe people work the weekend that we never see them. So it's hard to communicate what our expectations are, what our policies are, what changes are happening in the organization. And the number one thing I hear from everybody, and I'm sure you guys can all relate, is that there just isn't enough time. we think of managing employees and managing their behavior and doing staff evaluations and having feedback conversations as one more thing that we have to do in an already busy day. And a lot of times people will put it off and just say, well, I just don't have enough time. And one thing that I've learned and that I try to stress to people is that if you are a manager or a supervisor or a director, managing the behavior of your people is part of your job. And you have to treat it like part of your job. It's not the fun part. It's not the library part. It's not what we got into libraries for, but we have to make the time to do it and make a concerted effort to do that. So now that I've doom and gloomed everybody, let's talk about some things that we can do. So if you take anything away from today, this is the one thing that I want you to take away from today. The success or failure of your efforts to manage employee behavior depend on only one thing. And now this is a trade secret. I don't want anybody to share this with anybody. But guess what? The answer is you. Okay? You have to understand what your position is as a manager or a supervisor. You have to own it and manage those people. Okay? There is no failure unless you let yourself fail. Okay? And there's no success unless you make yourself succeed. So the only thing that's standing in your way of getting this right is you not wanting to do it. And I know you all do because you're here, so we're all fine. So what can we do in a small library? And this is something that's really important is creating a workplace culture. And what do I mean by that? When we talk about workplace culture, we're talking about how people treat each other, how they talk to each other, how they talk to patrons, how they handle change. Are they innovative or are they stuck in a rut? Those are the kinds of things that we talk about when we talk about culture. So we wanted to create a positive culture that encourages good behavior. So one of the first things that we need to do, especially in a small library, but also I've seen problems with this in larger places, is establishing a command structure. Your staff needs to know, I am in charge, you have to do what I say. Now, just recently, I had some people arguing with me about the tornado plan. And I stopped them and I said, look, the tornado plan is what it is because we say that's what it is, and you just have to do it. I don't care if you want to sit in the bathroom or not, that's what's going to happen. So sometimes you have to take that step and say, I am in charge, and you are going to do what I have to tell you, what I tell you to do. And that's difficult for us because, again, we don't want to have to tell people like that. We don't want to have to be that micromanager kind of person, but sometimes you do. And this may be as simple as everybody in your organization knowing who to report to. If you have a like an organizational chart of, here are the departments, if you have a problem, you go talk to this person. If you have a problem, you talk to this person, and then they'll come talk to me. Make sure that everybody knows what that is so we don't have people, talking to the wrong person or about the wrong person. We need to have that structure there. Okay. Next thing, and I've already said this, and I'll say it again because it's that important, is making your expectations clear. Okay? You and your management team or your board or whoever can have all of the best expectations in the world, but if your staff don't know what those are, they're not going to behave the way you want them to. Okay? So you have to have these things written down, and you have to have conversations about them. I really encourage regular meetings just for this reason, so that we can tell people, this is what I expect. This is the behavior that I want to see from you, and just continue to reinforce those things. But it also needs to be done on a daily basis. If you see someone doing something wrong, Tell them what the expectation is, and we'll get to that a little bit later about how we provide that kind of feedback. The next piece is encouraging positive, open communication without fear. Now, this is a big one, and I know it's a problem for a lot of people. And this is going to depend a lot on your management style and your leadership style, but it really is essential to model good behavior by being a positive influence on people. And also, we need people to be able to talk to us about problems that they're having. If people can't talk to us, issues are going to fester, and we're just going to continue to have problems. I have many, many times, and I'm sure everybody else has too, because this is a universal problem, where somebody will tell me, oh, well, you know, so-and-so just always does that, and they're, you know, and I'm like, okay, I had not heard anything about this. Or they'll tell me, you know, 3 weeks after the fact that, oh, you know, so-and-so forgot to lock the door when they left on Thursday. It's like, thanks for telling me that, you know. So we need to make sure that people are able to communicate with us so that we can take care of problems right away. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on then to communication. What does talking look like? I think we all know that, but this is a tiny slide that I'm going to talk a lot about. So there's several different pieces of communication that we need to think about when we're thinking about talking to our employees. The first piece of that is thinking. Now, I know we've all had times when we stuck our foot in our mouth and said something that we didn't mean to say, or we were angry and said something, or we thought of the perfect response after we had the conversation. So as we get into talking about how we give feedback, it's really important that we take the time to think about the way that we're going to communicate before we do it. And that means that we don't do things in the heat of the moment. We have all the information that we need. You know, we really are thinking before we speak. Okay? Then the next piece of it is speaking. And this is a fairly easy one, but we all talk every day, right? But we have to think about how the way that we're speaking is perceived by other people. So speaking is not just speaking, it's speaking and understanding how the person is hearing you. So you want to make sure that you're clear, that you're using clear language, that you're not being vague about things, that you're not using jargon, that you're not using words that they don't understand. And sometimes we'll have, maybe we're talking to people where there's a language barrier or something like that. We want to make sure that we're aware of that, and we speak clearly and easily. Then the next part is listening. Now, I know you all know that there's a difference between listening and hearing, but I'm going to tell you that anyway. There's a difference between listening and hearing. It's very important that when we are having conversations with our employees about behavior issues, that we are listening actively. And I'll show you some examples in a little bit about what that looks like in a behavior conversation. But it's really important that we're listening, we're repeating to have understanding, we're asking questions. That's a really big part of listening, is asking questions to make sure that you understand. And then not interrupting. Okay, let people say what they need to say. That's a very important part of listening. So don't just hear what they say. Actually listen and understand what they're saying. Then the other piece of communication, obviously, is nonverbal. This is one that's really, it's difficult, and I know I'm guilty of it. I'm a person that waves my hands around all the time, and I pace a lot, and I think it drives people nuts, but I can't help it. That's just the way I am. I'm sitting here right now waving my hands in front of the computer screen. But you have to understand how those things look to people. How are you sitting? Am I sitting with my arms crossed? Am I leaning on the table? Am I looking you in the eye? Am I looking at something else? Am I fidgeting? All of these things will have an effect on how the employee feels about the conversation that you're having with them. So be very careful, and it's one of those things that you honestly don't know you're doing until somebody tells you you're doing it. So just be aware of those things and think about them. The next part of communication is identifying and removing barriers. And the number one barrier I will tell you is technology. So if you are having a conversation with someone, especially a behavior modification conversation, remove technology from the equation, okay? Don't have your phone out. Don't sit in front of your computer screen. Don't let them have their phone out. You know, don't have your iPad out. Get all of that out of the way. Sit in a room where you don't have any of that available if you possibly can, because I know, you know, my computer will ding sometimes when I've got an email coming up. Well, that's a distraction, and it's going to really affect how we communicate together. Obviously, there's a lot of other barriers. You know, there's language barriers, there's barriers with disabilities, things like that. So just make sure that you're able to communicate and you understand what some of the problems might be before you get into the conversation. Now, the next piece of communication is email. I prefer email to phone almost exclusively. I'm not a talker on the phone, but it's not really a great way to communicate anything other than a factual conversation. So it's a great way to say, oh, hey, you know, the policy changed, or I need you to go do this. But we never want to have behavior conversations in email if we can possibly avoid it, because it's impossible to get our feelings across in writing. And there are far too many avenues for that to be misunderstood and to go completely wrong. So use email sparingly and take the time to actually talk to your staff face-to-face. Okay? And the best thing that we can do is to find new ways to communicate that work for us and work for our libraries. Obviously, everybody's different. When we're communicating our expectations, sometimes that might help to have notebooks where we all leave each other notes and say, you know, oh, don't forget to check the new library card policy because we changed something in it. Or, you know, we had a behavior problem with one of the patrons, and I just wanted you guys to know so that we know that we got to watch out for that guy. Same with daily logs, sometimes just to say, okay, here's what I did today, just as a communication tool. Something similar to shift change report. I've used like frequently asked questions and what I learned today, where if our reference staff get a question that they have to look up an answer that's a little bit difficult, they'll write that down for everybody else so that the rest of the staff doesn't have to take the time to do that. So there's a lot of different opportunities for communication in your organization that you can really take advantage of. So try things, see what happens, see what your staff likes. Everybody likes different things. Some people are introverted, some are extroverted. Make sure you know that and understand what you're doing. So, okay, so that's communication. Does anybody have any questions about what we've talked about so far? I'll give you a minute if you've got a question here.
Thanks, Becca. And if any of you do have questions, feel free to submit it in the question box. I do want to mention that the handouts were submitted. If you can't locate them, if you go to your control panel, if it's closed, make sure you open that up. And there should be a file that says Becca Handouts. It's a Word document, and you should be able to download that. If you don't have a question, it might be also helpful to share any success stories that maybe you've had in in management. I'm guessing, as Becca said, a lot of you are from smaller libraries, and maybe there are tactics that you have used that have been effective, and at the same time, on the opposite end of that, maybe there have been things that haven't worked so well. So please share those things. We can all learn from one another. So I'm not seeing anything right now, Becca, but thank you for pausing.
Okay. Yep. All right. That's okay. I had to get a drink of water. Okay. So we're going to move on here. And again, if you have any questions, because this is going to get into a little bit more of the really meaty part of the conversation here. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them out there. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the thing that everybody really came here to talk about. How do we manage negative behavior? I know what you guys want. I'm getting there. So what we think about is, first thing, how do we relate to our employees? And I'm going to go through this kind of quickly, but everything that I'm going to talk about is in the handout. I gave you this handout specifically because I can't possibly go through every single one of these in detail. We've got other more important things to talk about. But a couple of things. We want to be aware of how people like to work, and we want to adapt our style accordingly. Okay? It's important to realize that as a manager or a supervisor, it's not about what you like. We kind of give up that right to be what we like, and we have to at least meet our employees halfway, if not all the way. And sometimes we have to be the bigger people and change ourselves to help them out. The next thing, we need to get to know the skills and abilities of the people that we're working with. Sometimes you can find people who have some kind of skill that you had no idea that they had. Maybe somebody really likes to paint. And by telling them, oh, why don't you, paint this poster for me so that we can advertise our new program, that's going to give them a whole new level of ownership in the organization. And again, there's more on this in your handbook, so you can go into more of that. We want to understand how people think about problems. Okay? Are they problem solvers, or are they people who get derailed by problems? And these are things that we need to know so that we can deal with that behavior from them. Okay? We always want to keep a positive attitude, and this is the hardest thing. I am a very positive person. I put that out there that I want to be positive. I rarely tell my employees no. I will say, well, that's a fantastic idea. However, we can't do that right now. But I'm really careful to modify how I say what I say to keep it in a positive. So then the next piece is part of being positive is that we don't make everything a fight. Okay? Now, this is going to be really important when we start having our conversation, because I tell my staff all the time, it's not a conflict, it's a conversation. So we don't want to fight about everything. There doesn't need to be a winner and a loser. It can be a win-win kind of situation. We always want to strive for some kind of cooperation or win-win. Okay? We want to be respectful and understanding of our employees. Okay? We don't exist without them, so we need to respect who they are and what their issues are. Not that we won't try to modify those behaviors, but we have to understand why they're happening. We want to be honest and upfront about issues. Okay, don't let things fester. It's the worst thing you can do. And then we need to understand our employees' motivation. Okay, why do they do what they do? What will make them work better? And I know a lot of people will say, oh, well, let's just pay them more. Or they didn't get their raise, so they're going to be crabby. I will tell you that study after study after study shows that money is not the #1 motivating factor for 80+% of people. Okay, so what is it? Is it self-satisfaction? Is it advancement? Is it public praise? What really makes people, want to be better, want to work better for you. Okay, so it's really important to know that and understand that. And again, I could probably do an hour on all of these things. So there's more information in your handout, and you can do some research on it on your own. What we really need to talk about is feedback. Now, when I say feedback, that is going to translate to a behavior conversation. Okay, so someone has done a behavior, and we have to have a conversation about it. In my world, we call that feedback. We also call it coaching, and coaching can have a lot of different meanings, but we'll kind of get to that. Why we do coaching, feedback, that kind of thing, it prevents problem behaviors in the first place. Okay, we want to make sure that we're reinforcing positive behaviors and taking care of those problems when they come up. Doing feedback, doing regular coaching keeps us in touch with our employees. Like I said before, don't rely on your email. Get out there and talk to your staff face-to-face. There's no other way to do this. It strengthens our relationships with people. If we talk to them, we're having a conversation. It's not a one-way. Okay? Coaching, it makes everyone better. We work on improvement and things like that. So, and we want to treat everything as a learning opportunity. I tell everybody all the time that you're never wrong. You just have to learn something. Okay, and that's a very, very important thing. And I have had a lot of trouble with my managers teaching them to not tell people that they're wrong, which is very difficult for some people. Okay. Now, when we talk about preemptive feedback is happening before we have that behavior. So what we want to do is we want to have regular planned conversations with people. We want to go out and talk to them. We want to make sure that they're happy, that they have what they need to do their job, that everything's working out well. If they have any issues, we want to deal with them before they become an issue. Okay? So yes, we need to have the behavior conversation after the fact. But if we have conversations before anything happens, we can sometimes avoid those negative behaviors altogether. Now, when we do have to do them after the fact, there's two different kinds of feedback. Now, positive feedback is a reinforcement of good behavior. So this is when we see someone do something that we really like. They provide a really spectacular service to a patron. They found a book for them that nobody's been able to find for 2 weeks. So we need to tell them, I really like that behavior out of you. That is what I expect to see. So if we don't do that, and we just, say, oh, well, they're just doing their job and they know what they're supposed to be doing, it doesn't reinforce that good behavior. Now, for the most part, we want to reinforce good behaviors in front of other people. Okay? So it doesn't have to be a big deal. You can just walk up to somebody and say, hey, Jill, thank you for, providing such a great service to that person. I really appreciate it. That's all you have to do. It's one of the easiest things we can do, but most people don't do it. We all just assume that people know they're doing their job and they're fine. One thing I would warn against with positive feedback is don't do it too often. If you are giving positive feedback all of the time for really things that are just part of your job, don't say, oh, you checked that book in really, really well. It loses its meaning after a while. You want to say, oh, you had a lot of books to check in, and I'm really impressed that you got those all done in an hour. So you have to make sure that it's for something special that was a little bit above and beyond. Now, if we have a negative behavior that we have to give feedback for, then we're having a constructive conversation. And the constructive conversation corrects problem behaviors. So we're going to go into what does a constructive conversation look like. But first we're going to talk about when you notice negative behavior, you have to deal with it right now. Okay, don't wait till, next week. Sometimes you have to stop and think about it before you kind of fly off the handle. Don't do it when you're mad. Don't do it when the person you want to talk to is mad. So sometimes you may have to wait a couple of hours. You may have to wait a day. But try not to wait too much more than a week, because by then it's lost all of its meaning. They've forgotten what they've done. You've forgotten what they've done, and it feels like you're blurring it all of proportion at that point. So make sure you deal with it. Be consistent with all of your employees, okay? Don't treat one person differently than another. Don't say, oh, well, that's just the way Joan always is. I'm just going to let her do what she wants to do. Well, then Jill's saying, well, if she can do it, I can do it. So we need to be consistent. And again, we want to have conversations, not conflict. One thing when I ask my managers, why do you not want to have these behavior conversations with people? Invariably, the number one answer is, well, I don't like conflict. Well, too bad. Conflict is a part of life. But at the same time, if we tell ourselves that this is not a conflict, I am just having a conversation with this person because I am the manager, I have to tell them the right way. It's a factual conversation. It is not a conflict. Okay? When we tell ourselves that, we have to give up that excuse of avoiding conflict. And I think it puts us at ease a little bit when we think of it as a conversation instead of, I'm going to go have a fight with somebody. Okay? So it's very important. All right, so what does this conversation look like? Now, I want everybody to think for a second about a behavior problem that they have. And I know you all have one. So close your eyes and think about, what is my big behavior problem? And then we're going to go through this, and I want you to do your examples in your head. I normally do this with a live audience, so I get examples, but I want everybody to be able to kind of apply this to themselves. So thinking about your particular behavior issue. So I'm going to take the issue of, I have an employee who is a long-time employee who never shows up for work on time. We've changed her schedule. We've let her come in an hour later and stay later. We've tried all kinds of things. She just can't show up to work on time. Okay? So what is that conversation going to look like of, Deb, I need you to come to work on time? So first things first, we need to state the reason we're having the conversation. So in this case, we're going to tell the employee that I need you to show up for work on time. And what we're going to do is we're going to use I statements, and we're going to be specific. Okay? So here's the wrong way to do it. You never show up for work on time and you're a bad employee. Here's the right way to do it. I have noticed that the last 4 days you have come to work 10 minutes late. I really need you to be to work on time. Okay? We can see the difference there. I've made it about me. I haven't attacked them. I've told them what I want, what it looks like to me, and what the problem is. Okay? So they know exactly what I'm talking about. If I just say, well, you're always late, that doesn't help. But if I say, well, on Tuesday and Thursday, you were 15 minutes late and you didn't call, that shows them specifically what behavior am I talking about. Then you need to describe what you know about the situation and only address the current problem. Okay? Again, if I'm having this conversation about getting to work on time, I don't want to say, 3 weeks ago you called in sick, and now this week you've been late 3 days. Well, the first one has absolutely nothing to do with the second. Okay? We just want to talk about not being at work. Okay? Then we need to talk about the impact of their behavior. So when we talk about what is the impact of that, okay, so you're not at work on time. So I'm going to say, when you don't come to work on time, other people have to wait to start their work until you get here. Or your work doesn't get turned in on time and someone else has to wait for that and they can't complete their work on time. So again, you have to make it about how it affects the organization, not just about them. Now, one of the things when we have, and I think this is probably a pretty common situation, that's why I'm using it, with people who maybe don't get to work on time or try to leave early or something, our first instinct is to say, well, it's not fair. And, you know, everybody else has to show up on time, so you have to show up on time too. That's not going to help. They already know that. They probably already kind of said that that's what you're going to, you know, they know that that's what you're going to say to them. So you need a better answer than that, okay? Then what you want to do is ask for and listen to their response. And again, we're talking about listening. So I'm going to say, can you tell me what led to you being 10 minutes late 3 days this week? Okay? And then I'm going to listen to what she says to me. And then when she says something, then I'm going to repeat what she says. So I'm going to say, okay, so you're telling me that you couldn't get the cat in from outside, so you were 10 minutes late. Is that what I'm hearing? And if they say yes, then okay. If they say, well, no, that's not what I meant, then ask them to explain it again. And keep repeating until you both get to a point where you agree on that conversation. Then what you need to do is collaborate to find a solution. So we're going to say, well, if you need to make sure that the cat's in the house, why don't you let the cat out right away when you get up in the morning, and then by the time you're ready to eat your breakfast, the cat will be ready to come in, and you get the cat in before you go and do your hair. You know, something stupid like that. And obviously some situations are going to be more difficult to find a solution. But again, you know, so say that and say, will that work for you? Is that okay? Is that going to be a good solution? If they say, yes, that's fine, then we say, okay, great. So we're agreed that you're going to be to work on time because you're going to try really hard to, you know, make sure that you're ready to go and leave home on time. Well, yeah, okay. If they say, no, that's not going to work for me, keep working on it. Don't leave the conversation until you figured it out. Then the next piece is follow-up. And this is the one that we forget about more often than not. So we may say, okay, so we've decided that you're going to be to work on time every day. And I'm going to follow up with you in 3 weeks and make sure that you haven't had any late days in 3 weeks. Is that okay? Well, yeah, I can do that. So we need to go through every piece of this conversation. And it sounds like a lot, right? One of the things we talk about when we talk about having this behavior conversation is doing something called scripting. And if you haven't ever heard of it, there's a great book. It's called Life Script. And basically, it's writing down a conversation before you have it. Okay? So if you feel like you maybe can't think on your feet or you get flustered when you're talking to people, take the time before you meet with the person to write down at least the first 2 parts of this. Why are we having this conversation, and what do I know about this, and what about the situation, and what's the impact? You can write down those first 3 parts before the person ever even comes in your office. Okay? And then you're more prepared to have the rest of that conversation. They can't bamboozle you, they can't bully you, they can't start crying and you get off track, okay? Because you have it in writing, this is what I want. You can think of an ideal solution, and I recommend having a drop-dead solution in mind before they come in. So if it does not meet these criteria for my drop-dead solution, I'm not going to agree to it. Okay, I can give a little bit, but I can't give past this point. Again, it's important for you to know that before you have that conversation, so that you know, it doesn't get out of hand. It's incredibly difficult for anyone. I don't really care who you are, to think on your feet when you're in a stressful situation like this. So it's really important to try to take care of some of that stuff before you even talk to the person. Makes life a lot easier. It feels a little weird, trust me, but it helps a lot. So, so this is kind of the biggest piece that we are going to talk about today. So if anybody has any questions, or if you have a situation that you've tried to have a conversation about and have had trouble and want some help kind of figuring it out, if you want to throw that out in the chat and we can talk about that, I'll give you a minute to think about it, and we'll see if we can't try to talk about some solutions for some of the issues that you might be having.
Thanks, Becca. A few questions have come in. What was the title? What was the title of the book that you just mentioned?
It's called Life Script, like a movie script, like it's Life Script.
Life Script. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Another question that came in, how do you handle a situation where the person's private life gets involved at the library to the point where your employees don't want to talk to that person?
Okay, that's always a tough question. What I really recommend is that, again, you take it back to how is this impacting our organization. So you need to have that say to them, other people don't want to work with you because they're uncomfortable with this situation. And sometimes we have to be that blunt about it. And obviously, and I've had to say this to employees before, I respect that you're having problems at home. However, I have a business to run, and I need you to be contributing to that. And let's try to find a solution that will help you to not have your personal life affect work. And I think really you have to take the whole, personal piece out of it, whatever it is. Maybe they're going through a divorce or something. And tell them, I get that, I understand that, but we have to work when we're at work. We have certain expectations of behavior. Sometimes you have to find pieces of that behavior. Maybe it's when you talk about your problems at home at the front desk with other staff, it makes patrons uncomfortable and they don't like to hear about it. So you have to find those pieces that you can be specific about why it's a problem. Not just, well, nobody likes you, wants to talk to you, but why is that a problem? And it's a prickly thing, and obviously we want to help people. I just had someone who is going through some issues with depression and wasn't showing up for work, and I said to her, I want to help you. I want to make this okay for you. So let's come up with a solution. Let's find something temporary for the next 3 months that we can try to make this work for you, and then we'll come back and revisit it. But you have to understand that I need to do what's best for my patrons and for my library. Okay? So obviously if people are having trouble at home, we want to be understanding of that, but don't let them push you around.
That's a good point. You mentioned how email conversations should really contain factual stuff, and we want to avoid behavioral types of things. So how do you then, can you still use email then for documentation of some things? I mean, I know it's, you want to have, or are you documenting these things when you have the conversation with people?
Yep. Well, I've got another slide on documentation, but it is okay to use email as a kind of a follow-up to the conversation to say, maybe you guys came to a solution and you came up with something. It's appropriate and probably recommended to send them a follow-up email immediately after saying, I'm just verifying the conversation that we had. Here's what we decided. I'm going to follow up with you in 2 weeks. That's an appropriate way to use email for that conversation.
Great. Those are all the questions for now, and we have just over 10 minutes left.
Okay. All right. I think I just have a couple of little slides left.
No problem.
Okay. All right. So when we're having these conversations, and this comes back to the question about what do I do if it's somebody's personal life that's getting into, that's interfering with things. One of the things that we need to do in our conversations, and when we are kind of struggling to understand why people are doing what they're doing, there's kind of 5 basic reasons that there's bad behavior. And just about everything that you can imagine can boil down to one of these things. The first one is probably one of the most common ones. They don't know what to do or why. Okay? And again, that comes back to having the expectation. And maybe they don't know what good customer service looks like. Maybe they don't know that they're not supposed to talk about their personal life and, how their Aunt Susie is having a colonoscopy in front of patrons. Maybe they don't know that. We all like to assume that those things are common sense, but they're not. And sometimes they don't understand why their behavior is unacceptable. So that's where we need to create those expectations. This one is going to be probably your first go-to for trying to figure out why this is happening, what the reason for this is. Another one is that they don't have the resources to do it, okay? Maybe they're not meeting their performance goals. Maybe they're not getting all of their stuff checked in on time, and it's taking them till 1:30 to check in all the books. Well, maybe the computer's too slow. Maybe they don't have the right setup. Maybe they haven't been told, how to use the shortcuts. So again, make sure that they have the resources to do the behavior that you expect. And as a manager or supervisor, it's your job to make sure that they have the resources. Okay. The next one. My phone's talking to me. They may not know how to do a correct interview. Again, they may just not have the skills behind it. Okay? There may be some barriers to performance, and these can be anywhere, they can run the gamut of things, and you can figure out if there's barriers to performance. That's something that will usually come out in a conversation. They'll say, well, I can't because. So you can work through those things. And then the last one, and this is the only one that's really almost impossible to deal with, is that they just don't want to. Okay? They are just determined to do it their way, and to heck with you. In that case, there's not a lot you can do. There's not a lot of conversations you can have that are going to change their mind. You can threaten to fire them, but honestly, that probably won't help. Okay? So if you get to a don't want to do it situation, which is pretty rare. I've had very few conversations with people where it's a matter of don't want to do it, but it happens. So go back and think about the example you were thinking about when we were talking about the feedback conversation, and where you think that might fit in one of these reasons for unacceptable behavior. And it's one of the things that we want to think about before we have that conversation. So we can say, well, do you just not know what the expectation is, or do you not want to do it? And that'll really, really inform us on, what the next steps are. Okay. All right, this is the end of it. If you have someone who just doesn't want to and is not going to listen to you and won't do anything, termination is the best option. Okay? Nobody wants to fire anybody. And people will tell you, oh, you have to be really careful about who you fire because they're going to come back at you. If you do it right, it'll be fine. I promise. And again, I've had very few conversations that come to termination. It's something that we have to deal with, but it doesn't happen every time. So the number one thing when you're talking about termination, if you get to the point where you feel like you have to fire someone, make sure that you have documented everything, okay? Every conversation that you've had, make sure you at least, write yourself a note or keep a little file of, I had this conversation with so-and-so on this day about this thing. I recommend having a progressive discipline plan that is written in your employee handbook that says, first time we'll just have a conversation with you, and then the next time we're going to do a written warning, and then the next time we're going to have a final warning, and then the next time is termination. And you can set that up whatever way you want. There aren't a lot of legal requirements for what progressive discipline looks like. So you can set that up however works best for your organization. If you want to do a 3 and out, that's fine. What I recommend, though, when you talk about progressive discipline and when you write that policy is that you have a caveat in there that says, well, the director can do whatever they want. They can skip any part of progressive discipline at any time for any reason, and they can terminate at any time for any reason without, having to go through the progressive discipline. Obviously, there's going to be some legal issues with this. In Indiana, we are at will, so I can literally fire anyone at any time without really even giving a reason. But I don't want to do that because it's not good business practice. So make sure that you understand the laws in your area before you get to that point. But and if you do write a progressive discipline plan, I'd recommend having a lawyer review it just in case. But that is the one thing that will make it easier for you, because you can say, okay, this is your final written warning. You do understand that the next time we have this issue, it's going to lead to termination. And they will have to say to you, yes, I understand that. And at that point, you should all understand what the issue is. So it will make it easier for you to have that final termination conversation when you have to. But basically, it's know when enough is enough. Okay? If you can't deal with the person anymore, you've had the conversations, you've tried everything, don't let it drag out. Just take care of it when you have to take care of it. Okay? And that's termination in a nutshell. So that is the end of what I have to say to you. So if there's any other questions, I can take those. Or if anybody wants to, like Jamie said, if you have some issues that you've run across that you want to share, or some success that you've had that you want to share, we can go ahead and do that as well.
All right, thanks, Becca. A few more questions did come in, and one of them is, how do you deal with an employee who doesn't want to communicate with you, and what consequences can you enforce?
Okay, not wanting to communicate is one of those weird things. And I think there is, in the handouts that I gave you, in the feedback part of that handout, there's some pieces about how we deal with kind of the responses that people give us. So not being communicative and not wanting to talk about a problem, to me, is tantamount to subordination. It's them saying, I don't care about you, and I'm not going to listen to you, and I don't believe that you have any authority over me. And so I think the thing to do in that case is to say to them, if you choose to continue to not communicate with me, I will consider it insubordination, and I'm doing a written warning on it right now. And so you can continue to not communicate with me, and that will lead to termination. So, but if we do that, we need to make sure that we've made clear what we want to communicate about,
okay,
and what good communication looks like.
Okay, so we just can't say to that person, you're not communicating with me, and if it doesn't improve, that could lead to termination. We have to be more specific than that.
Yeah, we need to say, okay, you are not, it depends on, what are they not communicating about? If they say, you can say, last week you didn't tell me that we had to kick a person out of the library because they were smoking. I need you to tell me when things like that happen.
Okay.
Okay? So we have to have specific examples of what they are not communicating about so that they understand when it's appropriate to communicate.
Okay.
Because it's not one of those common sense things. We all think it is, but it's not.
Right.
So you have to be really specific about what they are and aren't communicating about.
Another question. What about passing the buck? It's never the employee's mistake. It must have been the computer or a different staff member or et cetera, et cetera. Endless list of excuses. Yep. Tips on that.
Yep. Again, in the handout, there's a whole other section on denial. But the best thing to do, again, is to have your conversation scripted out so that you can come back and say, this is not about, what the computer is doing. If there's trouble with the computer, we can have that conversation at another time. But right now, we need to be aware of the fact that you are not completing this job on time. Okay? So a lot of it, you have to just continue to deny them that opportunity and keep bringing it back. You have to be the one that keeps roping it in. If they say, oh, well, I didn't do that, you have to be able to say, I saw you do it. I know you did it. You can't deny it.
Right.
We have evidence here. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes, somebody tells you, oh, you saw so-and-so doing such and such. And so you can say, well, I don't know the situation. This is what I've been told. I need you to be aware that this is an issue. And we're not going to talk about whether it was your fault or not. This is the issue, and it's what we're talking about right now.
Okay. Great.
So you have to just be able to bring it back.
A comment that came in, and maybe you can follow up on this, depending on how serious the situation is, I would recommend keeping the document everything off-site and not on your work files. Is that something you would recommend? Or what do you think?
Again, it depends on the legal issues. If you put anything in their employee file, that's going to be a problem. Okay, so if you're just having conversations with people, I will generally just kind of keep a little list in a notebook on my desk. It's not public record. Again, you have to check your laws in your area. But if you get to the point where you're doing a written warning, that has to be documented in their file. Because if you try to go back and terminate on it, and it's not in their file and you've kept it somewhere else, it's not going to stand up. So it's an iffy thing, but be appropriate about it. And when you document things, don't say, oh, well, so-and-so was belligerent when I talked to them. The documentation should consist of, had a conversation with Julie on February 2nd about showing up for work on time. And that's it.
And couldn't those files be locked somewhere in your work area, like in your office?
They could, yeah. Yep. I would keep mine, in a desk drawer or something, and out of sight, obviously. So
sure.
If you're just having conversations with people, I wouldn't put them in their file until we have like a written warning. But if you're doing any kind of follow-up through email saying, this is a follow-up to our conversation about such and such, there's your documentation right there, and you don't need to do anything else.
Okay, great. Another comment, someone commented, it is really difficult to fire someone. I inherited a situation that was tough, but enough was enough. The situation was dragging the whole organization down, and the outcome has been fantastic. And in the end, it was the right thing to do.
Yep. Nobody wants to fire anybody. I don't want to fire anybody. But it has to happen sometimes. And I have heard so many people, oh, our lawyer won't let us do it. Or, if you work for a city or a county, county HR won't let us do it. I heard that all the time. County HR won't let us do it. Mm-hmm. Oh, my God. And, obviously lawyers are always going to err on the side of caution. But we need to take care of those situations so they don't drag everything down.
Great. Well, that is all the time we have for this afternoon. I want to thank Becca for an excellent presentation. As I mentioned, the recording of this presentation will be on our website later today. And this is our last webinar for spring. It doesn't feel like spring of 2016, if you will. And we will be starting back up in late summer and fall. So make sure you watch our website and check emails from me on things that are coming up. So again, thank you, Becca, so much. Thank you all for your questions and for your feedback and your stories. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great week. So long.